Vengeance was a taste America craved. After months of grueling attrition in the Pacific, the demand from Washington and the American people was simple: find the Japanese fleet and sink it. But in the late autumn of 1942, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, facing the darkest strategic reality of the war, gave an order that stunned the high command and frustrated a nation thirsty for blood: freeze the fleet. By October 1942, the fight for the Solomon Islands was less a battle and more a mutual hemorrhage. Guadalcanal, an 80-mile stretch of muddy jungle, was the entire focus of the Pacific War. On the island, the Marines were exhausted, plagued by malaria and ceaseless Japanese counterattacks, fighting yard by brutal yard under the crushing weight of the tropic sun. Their only lifeline was the sea, a sea that the Imperial Japanese Navy contested every single night, sending the infamous Tokyo Express roaring down the slot. Nimitz commanded the vast Pacific from the quiet, high-ceilinged war rooms of Pearl Harbor. He was a man defined by his measured demeanor, a calm center in the eye of the typhoon. But even Nimitz felt the immense pressure. He knew that if the Marines on Guadalcanal failed, the entire strategic map would fold. He needed decisive action, but the tools available were worn down, damaged, and perilously few, forcing him into impossible calculations about risk. The stunning losses continued on the open ocean. Just days earlier, at the Battle of Santa Cruz, the U.S. Navy paid a heavy price to slow the Japanese advance. We lost the USS Hornet, the second American carrier sunk in less than a year. The toll was agonizing. Every ship sunk meant hundreds of irreplaceable trained men lost. Nimitz looked at the casualty reports, knowing that courage was infinite, but resources were not. Following Santa Cruz, the unthinkable had happened. The U.S. Pacific Fleet had only one operational aircraft carrier remaining. The famed USS Enterprise, though battered by multiple bomb hits, was limping back toward port, her deck scarred and damaged. The USS Saratoga was undergoing repairs on the west coast, and no new carriers were ready. The American superpower was reduced to a single lifeline, defended by the surface ships that remained. The crisis was not just ships, but logistics. The long supply lines stretching across the vast Pacific meant every gallon of fuel, every repair part, and every trained pilot was precious. Nimitz recognized a critical vulnerability: if he risked the Enterprise and lost her, the Japanese could sweep unimpeded across the central Pacific. The industrial might of America was still gearing up. If he lost his remaining shield now, there would be no replacement for months. Washington, however, demanded aggression. Political pressure mounted, fueled by devastating newspaper headlines questioning the efficacy of the Pacific Command. Why was the enemy able to resupply at will? Where was the massive American fleet? The public wanted to see battleships sailing and carriers launching strikes. The idea that the most powerful navy in the world had to hold its strength felt like cowardice, not strategy. It was in this crucible of pressure that Nimitz made his toughest decision: preservation over precipitation. He issued stern orders to his fleet commanders restricting offensive operations. His primary objective shifted from sinking ships to surviving the next 30 days. He gambled that the Japanese, fighting far from their own logistical base, were also reaching a point of breaking strain, even if they didn't know it yet. Nimitz understood that the fleet was the future. To lose the remaining assets would cost them the entire war, sacrificing years of potential fighting capability for one moment of revenge. He quietly pulled the Enterprise and remaining heavy cruisers back to a safer distance, relying heavily on the Marine and Army Air Forces fighting from Henderson Field, and trusting his surface fleet to conduct desperate, close-range defense. This strategic caution filtered down to the men on the front lines. Sailors and airmen, facing relentless action, felt the pinch. They knew they were short of ships and planes. But they also sensed the unwavering confidence radiating from the high command. Nimitz's strategy required immense discipline and faith from those fighting, trusting that their sacrifices were part of a larger, patient plan designed to save the force for the ultimate confrontation. While the fleet held back, the repair crews in Pearl Harbor performed a near miracle. They worked 24 hours a day, focused solely on getting the Enterprise back into the fight. In just 72 agonizing hours, technicians patched the massive hole in her flight deck and restored critical systems, enabling her to steam west again. It was a testament to American resilience, pushing the damaged carrier back into the firing line far sooner than expected. The wisdom of Nimitz's restraint was tested immediately during the decisive naval battle of Guadalcanal in mid-November. Without consistent carrier air cover, the surface fleet engaged in some of the most chaotic and intense night fighting of the war. Destroyers and cruisers dueled at point-blank range in the dark, driven by sheer courage to protect the essential supply convoys heading for the embattled Marines. The cost was terrible. Admirals Daniel Callahan and Norman Scott were lost, and the American surface fleet suffered grievous losses, but they achieved their objective. They broke the backbone of the Japanese efforts to bombard and resupply Guadalcanal. The men of the surface fleet, knowing they lacked the decisive support of the carriers, offered up their lives to buy Nimitz the time he needed to rebuild. Nimitz's quiet strategy had worked. By freezing the fleet and refusing to commit his few remaining carriers to unnecessary risk, he preserved the core of the Pacific fighting force. Though Japan won tactical victories, they could not sustain the attrition of ships and, crucially, experienced pilots. In preserving the Enterprise, Nimitz ensured that when America's industrial might finally matured, he would have the experienced sailors and infrastructure needed to launch the final, unstoppable offensive. Nimitz demonstrated a profound courage that day, the courage to resist overwhelming pressure and choose the long game over immediate gratification. He understood that victory belongs not just to those who fight with valor, but to those who master the delicate art of survival. The freezing of the fleet in 1942 was not a retreat, but the most vital strategic repositioning, securing the foundation upon which the eventual conquest of the Pacific would be built.